When Greg and Lisa Thompson bought the Ocean View house in Del Mar, California, they never expected it to come with a ghost. The home had been on the market for months, quietly whispered about in local real estate circles. Some claimed it was bad luck to live where tragedy had struck. Others swore they had seen strange lights flickering in the windows at night. Greg dismissed the rumors. "People always try to make a story out of nothing," he told Lisa as they signed the papers. The property was stunning vaulted ceilings, glass walls that let in the golden glow of the California sunset, and a private path leading down to the beach. They had gotten it for a bargain. The first few nights were uneventful, save for the usual creaks and groans of an unfamiliar house settling around them. It wasn't until Lisa started unpacking the bedroom that things took a turn. One evening, as she stood in front of the bathroom mirror, a chill crept up her spine. The air was thick, suffocating, as if the room had suddenly lost its oxygen. Then the lights flickered. "Greg?" she called, but her voice felt swallowed by the silence. She turned back to the mirror and gasped. For a split second, just a heartbeat, she saw a figure standing behind her. A man, his features blurred, his expression unreadable. She spun around, but the room was empty. That was the first time she saw him. Over the next few weeks, strange occurrences became routine. The faint scent of cologne one Lisa didn't recognize lingered in the air. Doors that had been locked at night were found open in the morning. Greg, always the skeptic, brushed it off as old house quirks. But Lisa knew better. Then, one night, the television turned on by itself. The screen buzzed with static before settling on an old episode of All My Children. "That's him," Lisa whispered. Greg sat up. "What?" She pointed at the screen. Alec Musser's face filled the frame. His character, Del Henry, was speaking, though the words were muffled and distant, as if coming from another world. Then, without warning, the screen cut to black. Lisa didn't sleep that night. Things escalated. Shadows moved without a source. The shower turned on by itself. Objects, keys, books, even Lisa's wedding ring disappeared and reappeared in strange places. The final straw came one night when Lisa woke to the sound of soft, muffled weeping. It was coming from the bathroom. Heart pounding, she nudged Greg awake. "Do you hear that?" Greg sat up, frowning. The sound continued low, sorrowful. Summoning all her courage, Lisa stepped toward the bathroom door. It was slightly ajar. She reached out, pushed it open. There, in the dim light, was the reflection of a man standing in the mirror. Not in the room, just in the mirror. Alec Musser. His eyes met hers, full of something unspoken, something heavy with grief. Lisa screamed. Greg yanked her back, slamming the door shut. The weeping stopped instantly. The next morning, they called a medium. After walking through the house, the woman nodded solemnly. "He's still here," she said. "But he doesn't want to hurt you. He's lost, trapped in his sorrow." They held a small ceremony, lighting candles and whispering words of peace. They played soft music songs from Alec's time, hoping to give him comfort. That night, the house was silent. No shadows, no flickering lights, just the steady crash of waves against the shore. The Thompsons never saw him again. But sometimes, late at night, Lisa still swore she could hear the faint echo of a voice distant, broken whispering from the depths of the empty house. Why? The house had been quiet for weeks. Lisa had almost convinced herself that it had all been in her head, a trick of stress and sleepless nights. The ceremony had worked, she told herself. The air no longer felt thick with unseen weight. The nights were still, and the uneasy sense of being watched had faded. But something lingered. Not in the way of flickering lights or vanishing objects. No, it was something far more subtle. A presence that did not make itself known through grand, terrifying gestures, but through the quiet things. The way the wind moved unnaturally through closed windows. The way the temperature in the bathroom never seemed to match the rest of the house. Always colder, as though the walls themselves still held on to some lingering sorrow. Lisa stopped mentioning it to Greg. He had declared it over and done with, and she didn't want to sound obsessed. But in the late hours of the night, when he was fast asleep, she would lie awake and listen. to nothing, to everything. Then, one evening, the house breathed again. It started with the mirror. Lisa had been brushing her hair at the vanity in their bedroom, the dim glow of the bedside lamp casting long shadows across the walls. She was tired, bone-weary in a way that no amount of rest could mend. The kind of exhaustion that sat deep in the body, like a wound. The brush slowed in her hand. Her reflection. She wasn't moving. A cold grip seized her chest, her breath catching in her throat as she watched. The Lisa in the mirror remained still, her face pale, her eyes wide with something she couldn't name. And then, a shift, a flicker, almost imperceptible, but enough to send a deep, crawling horror through her veins. Behind her, a shape. She spun, the chair nearly tipping over beneath her. Empty. The room was as it had been, silent, undisturbed. But the air was thick again, charged with the static weight of something unseen, something that had always been there, waiting. She turned back to the mirror. There, standing in the doorway, was a man. His figure was indistinct, blurred at the edges like a photograph left too long in the sun. His shoulders hunched slightly, his head tilted as though caught mid-thought. His eyes dark, shadowed, were locked onto hers, searching, pleading. Alec. She knew it instantly. The breath she had been holding escaped in a shudder. The figure in the mirror moved. Not toward her, not away, just moved, like a sigh shifting through the air. She wanted to scream, to wake Greg, to run. But she couldn't, because in that moment, as the silence pressed in around her, she understood something she had not wanted to admit. He wasn't trying to hurt them. He was trying to be seen, to be understood, to be heard. And so, through the cold weight of fear gripping her chest, Lisa did the only thing she could. She whispered his name, and the lights went out. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. The darkness swallowed the room in an instant. Lisa's breath hitched, her pulse hammering in her ears. The silence was deafening, not the soft, natural stillness of night, but an oppressive void, thick and unnatural, as if the very walls were holding their breath. She clenched her fingers against the vanity's edge, grounding herself, willing her eyes to adjust. The only light came from the street lamp outside, its glow seeping weakly through the curtains, casting elongated shadows that stretched and shuddered with the movement of the wind. And then, the sound, soft at first, a whisper of movement against the hardwood floor. Not footsteps, something lighter, like the drag of fabric, the barely there rustle of someone shifting their weight. Lisa swallowed hard, her fingers trembling against the wood. She knew she wasn't alone, but she didn't turn around. Some instinct, ancient, primal, kept her still, kept her eyes locked on the mirror, on the shape that still lingered in its reflection. Alec Musser stood just beyond the doorway, his head tilted slightly, his expression unreadable in the dimness. His features were softened by the haze of something not quite real, but his presence was undeniable. And then he moved, not toward her, not away, just shifted, like he was caught between two worlds, unsure where he belonged. Lisa's breath came in shallow pulls, but she didn't look away. "Why are you here?" she whispered. The room held its breath, and then the mirror changed. The reflection no longer showed her bedroom, no longer showed Alec standing in the doorway. Instead, the glass had darkened, as though fogged by unseen hands. Shapes flickered in its depths, ghostly, fragmented. A different room, a different time. The bathroom. She saw it clearly now, even though she knew she was still sitting at her vanity. The dim glow of overhead lights, the cold porcelain of the sink, the subtle gleam of polished tile beneath bare feet. And in the center of it all, a man. Alec. Not as the ghostly figure in her room, but as he had been in life. Solid. Whole. And he was crying. Lisa's throat tightened. He sat on the edge of the bathtub, shoulders slumped, hands clasped together as if in silent prayer. His chest rose and fell in uneven gasps. His face contorted in grief so raw it sent a tremor through her bones. He was alone. Utterly, devastatingly alone. Lisa wanted to turn away, to shut her eyes, to erase the scene unfolding in front of her. But something kept her watching, held her captive in the reflection's cold grip. Alec's hands moved slow, deliberate. He reached for something beside him. Lisa's stomach clenched. She didn't want to see what happened next. Didn't want to witness the moment where life bled into death, where pain became silence. But she couldn't look away. And then, flash. Bright, blinding, like lightning splitting the night. Lisa gasped, stumbling back, her chair scraping loudly against the floor as the vision shattered. The mirror was just a mirror again. The bedroom was as it had been. The darkness, the stillness, the heavy quiet. And Alec was gone. Lisa sat frozen, her breath coming in sharp, ragged pulls. The weight of what she had seen pressed against her chest, suffocating, unbearable. Alec wasn't haunting this house to scare them. He was reliving his final moments, over and over again, trapped. Lisa swallowed against the tightness in her throat, blinking back the burn of tears. She had to do something. But what? How do you help a ghost who refuses to leave? The answer whispered through the darkness, unspoken but undeniable. You listen. And for the first time, Lisa understood. Alec Musser had a story to tell. And he wasn't finished yet. Lisa sat motionless in the dim glow of the bedroom, her breath shallow, her fingers numb where they gripped the vanity. The house around her was still, yet charged, as if the walls themselves were bracing for something unseen. The mirror before her reflected only her own wide, terrified eyes now, but she could still feel the weight of him lingering in the air. She knew, deep in the marrow of her bones, that Alec was still there, somewhere. The vision she had seen raw, aching, unbearably lonely clung to her like a film of cold sweat. It wasn't just a memory. It wasn't some fragmented echo of the past playing on repeat. No, this was something else. Something unfinished. Lisa exhaled shakily, running a trembling hand through her hair. She knew Greg would dismiss it all, chalk it up to stress, exhaustion, and overactive imagination. But she had seen it, felt it, the sorrow, the weight of it pressing against her like an invisible tide. Alec Musser wasn't haunting this house. He was trapped in it. The thought sent a slow chill crawling down her spine. Somewhere in the stillness, the house groaned a deep, aching sound, like wood stretching after a long slumber. Lisa flinched, her eyes darting toward the door. The hallway beyond yawned dark and hollow, the kind of darkness that felt alive, stretching deep into unseen corners. She swallowed hard, pushing herself to her feet. She needed to see it. The bathroom. Her limbs felt leaden as she crossed the room, her breath a careful, measured thing in her chest. The floor was cold beneath her bare feet, the air thick and unmoving. She hesitated in the doorway. The bathroom was the same as it had been when they moved, in bright white tiles, modern fixtures, a large mirror reflecting the space back at her. But it felt different now. Heavier. The kind of heavy that made the walls feel too close, the air too dense. Lisa stepped inside. Immediately, the temperature dropped. Her breath plumed in the air, a fragile, fleeting mist that dissolved into nothing. The light above flickered once, twice, before steadying. She turned toward the mirror and froze. The reflection was wrong. It wasn't showing her, wasn't showing the bathroom as it was now. Instead, the room in the mirror was dimmer, tinged with the sepia hues of something faded with time. A towel hung on the rack, but not her towel. A razor sat on the sink, but not Greg's. A shadow moved behind her, but she was alone. Lisa's stomach clenched. Her pulse roared in her ears, each beat a warning, a desperate plea to turn away. But she couldn't. The scene in the mirror flickered, shifted, and then Alec was there, sitting on the edge of the bathtub, his head bowed, his shoulders hunched, just as she had seen before. But now he was moving. Lisa's breath hitched. She watched as he reached for something beside him. The gun. Her body went rigid. No. Her mind screamed it, but the word never left her lips. She knew this was just a vision, an imprint of what had already happened. But the urge to stop him surged through her veins with unbearable force. Alec's fingers brushed the cold metal. Lisa's pulse stuttered. She had to do something. Anything. Before she knew she had moved, her hand reached forward toward the glass, toward the past, toward him. Alec. The moment the name left her lips, everything shattered. A deafening crack. The mirror exploded outward, shards raining down in glittering, razor-sharp fragments. Lisa staggered back, arms flying up to shield her face. The bathroom light flickered wildly, buzzing like a dying insect. And then, silence. Thick, stifling, waiting. Lisa's breath came in uneven gasps, her chest rising and falling in erratic shudders. The mirror was destroyed, nothing but a jagged, fractured ruin of broken glass reflecting slivers of her wide, terrified eyes. But something else had changed. The air. The weight of it. The presence of it. She wasn't alone. Slowly, trembling, she turned. And there, standing in the doorway, was Alec. No longer a mere shadow in the mirror. He was here, real, solid, and watching her. His expression wasn't angry. It wasn't menacing. But it was something else. Something unreadable. Something waiting. Lisa's heart pounded against her ribs like a caged animal. The house was no longer just haunted. It had woken up. And Alec Musser had finally stepped through. Lisa stood frozen in the bathroom, her breath shallow, her pulse a frantic rhythm in her chest. Shattered glass lay scattered across the floor, catching the flickering light like tiny, jagged stars. And in the doorway, Alec Musser stood watching her. Not a reflection, not a flicker of movement in the mirror. He was here. Real, not in the way the living were real, but in the way memories were. His figure was solid, yet there was something off about him, something fractured at the edges, as though he existed just slightly out of sync with time itself. His face was pale, his eyes hollowed with something deep and sorrowful. He wore a simple t-shirt and sweatpants, his feet bare against the hardwood floor. His hair was slightly disheveled, as if he had just woken from some long, restless sleep, and he was staring straight at her. Lisa swallowed, her throat tight. She didn't know what to say. Did you know we bought your house? Are you lost? Do you even know you're dead? None of the words felt right. Alec shifted slightly, his weight tilting forward. He looked like he wanted to speak, but something was stopping him. His lips parted, hesitated, closed again. Lisa's breath came in slow, careful pulls. She didn't move, didn't dare. Then, finally, he whispered, "I don't remember." His voice was quiet, hoarse, as though dragged from the depths of some faraway dream. The words weren't meant for her. They weren't even really meant for this world. Lisa swallowed against the lump in her throat. "What don't you remember?" Alec blinked. He looked down at his hands, flexing them slowly, like he was testing the reality of them. A frown flickered across his face, lost and unfocused. Then, "The end," he murmured. A wave of cold washed over Lisa, so deep it nearly sent her knees buckling. He didn't know. He didn't remember how he died. Lisa took a slow, unsteady breath, choosing her next words carefully. "Do you remember anything?" Alec lifted his gaze to hers again, and for the first time there was something there. Recognition. "You," he said. Lisa's stomach dropped. Alec took a step forward, and the air around them seemed to ripple, like heat rising from asphalt. The light in the bathroom flickered, dimming, casting long shadows across the walls. Lisa held her ground, though every nerve in her body screamed at her to run. "Me?" she whispered. Alec tilted his head slightly. He looked at her as if he had seen her before, as if her presence wasn't a coincidence, wasn't random, as if she had been a part of this story all along. But that was impossible. Lisa had never met Alec Musser. She had never even known his name until they moved in. And yet, the way he looked at her, he took another step. Lisa's breath caught. And then, a sudden, sharp bang echoed through the house. Not the crash of glass. Not the creak of the old wooden beams. A sound deeper, heavier. A sound that didn't belong in this moment. A gunshot. Lisa barely had time to react before the world around her shifted. Everything bent, twisted like reality itself had cracked open. For a single, heart-stopping second, She was no longer in her home. She was somewhere else. A different night. A different time. The bathroom was the same, but the details had changed: the towels, the scent of the air, the feeling of it. The sound of distant waves crashing against the shore. And Alec wasn't looking at her anymore. He was looking at himself. Lisa gasped. He stood in front of the mirror, his reflection staring back at him with an expression she couldn't quite name. Not sadness, not fear. Something emptier. Something final. And in his hand, the gun. Lisa felt her breath lock in her throat. This was it. This was the moment she had seen before, the moment he didn't remember. She wanted to stop it. Wanted to scream. To reach forward. To grab the gun from his hand before. Bang. The sound ripped through the silence, reverberating in the tight space. Alec staggered. His knees buckled. The gun slipped from his fingers, clattering against the tile, spinning in slow, mocking circles. He fell. The floor beneath him darkened, spreading, pooling, blooming. And Lisa felt herself being dragged backward. The vision tore away from her like a curtain ripped from its rod. She gasped, stumbled, felt the cold realness of her own bathroom floor beneath her feet again. The present. Her home. The vision was gone. But Alec was still standing there. His face had changed. It wasn't lost anymore. He had seen. He had remembered. Lisa's chest rose and fell in sharp, uneven gasps. She wanted to say something, wanted to break the silence that stretched thick between them. But it was Alec who moved first. Slowly, his hand lifted. He placed it over his chest, right where the wound had been. And then, finally, he let out a small, shuddering breath. Lisa didn't know what happened next. She didn't know if he faded, if he vanished, if the house finally exhaled the presence it had held onto for so long. Because she wasn't watching anymore. She was closing her eyes and listening to the silence, to the stillness, to the way the house felt different now. Not empty, not broken, just quiet, peace. And for the first time since they had moved in, Lisa slept. And Alec Musser never came back again. But some nights when the wind moved through the open windows, when the waves crashed against the distant shore, Lisa swore she could still hear a whisper, faint and fleeting, tucked deep into the heartbeat of the house. A voice, soft, grateful, and finally free. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story.